The expanding fireball and shockwave of the Trinity explosion, seen 0.025 seconds after detonation on July 16, 1945. A test of the plutonium bomb seemed vital, however, both to confirm its novel implosion design and to gather data on nuclear explosions in general. Several plutonium bombs were now in the pipeline and would be available over the next few weeks and months. It was therefore decided to test one of these. Exposed wiring of the gadget, the nuclear device that exploded as part of Trinity, the first test of an atomic bomb. At the time of this photo, the device was being prepared for its detonation, which took place on July 16, 1945. Exposed wiring of the gadget, the nuclear device that exploded as part of Trinity, the first test of an atomic bomb. At the time of this photo, the device was being prepared for its detonation, which took place on July 16, 1945. Robert Oppenheimer chose to name this the Trinity test, a name inspired by the poems of John Donne. Los Alamos director J. Robert Oppenheimer is seen in silhouette as he oversees final assembly of the gadget at the Trinity test site in July of 1945. The site chosen was a remote corner on the Alamogordo bombing range known as the Jornada del Muerto, or Journey of Death, 210 miles south of Los Alamos. The elaborate instrumentation surrounding this site was tested with an explosion of a large amount of conventional explosives on May 7. Preparations continued throughout May and June and were complete by the beginning of July. Jumbo, a 200-ton steel canister designed to recover the plutonium used in the Trinity test in the event that the explosives used were unable to trigger a chain reaction. In the end, Jumbo wasn't used for recovery, but was placed near ground zero to help gauge the effects of the blast. It survived intact, but its support tower did not. 3 observation bunkers located 5-6 miles north, west, and south of the firing tower at ground zero would attempt to measure key aspects of the reaction. Specifically, scientists would try to determine the symmetry of the implosion and the amount of energy released. A longer exposure photograph of the Trinity explosion seconds after detonation on July 16, 1945. Additional measurements would be taken to determine damage estimates, and equipment would record the behavior of the fireball. The biggest concern was control of the radioactivity the test device would release. Not entirely content to trust favorable meteorological conditions to carry the radioactivity into the upper atmosphere, the Army stood ready to evacuate the people in surrounding areas. The expanding fireball and shockwave of the Trinity explosion, seen 0.053 seconds after detonation on July 16, 1945. On July 12, the plutonium core was taken to the test area in an Army sedan. The non-nuclear components left for the test site at 12:01 a.m. A fireball begins to rise, and the world's first atomic mushroom cloud begins to form, 9 seconds after Trinity detonated on July 16, 1945. Friday the 13th. During the day on the 13th, final assembly of the gadget, as it was nicknamed, took place in the McDonald Ranch house by 5:00 p.m. U.S. military observers watched the explosion during Operation Crossroads. Baker, a nuclear test conducted on Bikini Atoll on July 25, 1946. This was the 5th nuclear explosion ever, after 2 other tests and the 2 bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On the 15th, the device had been assembled and hoisted atop the 100-foot firing tower. Leslie Groves, Vannevar Bush, James Conant, Ernest Lawrence, Thomas Farrell, James Chadwick, and others arrived in the test area, where it was pouring rain. A massive column of water rises from the sea as the U.S. detonates an atomic bomb at Bikini Atoll in the Pacific in the first underwater test of the device on July 25, 1946. The blast and the enormous wave of water that followed immediately overwhelmed several abandoned ships, which were part of the site's dummy fleet of former warships. Groves and Oppenheimer, standing at the S-10,000 control bunker, discussed what to do if the weather did not break in time for the scheduled 4 a.m. test. A huge mushroom cloud rises above Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands on July 25, 1946, following an atomic test blast, part of the U.S. military's Operation Crossroads. The dark spots in the foreground are ships that were placed near the blast site to test what an atomic bomb would do to a fleet of warships. To break the tension, Fermi began offering anyone listening a wager on whether or not the bomb would ignite the atmosphere, and if so, whether it would merely destroy New Mexico or destroy the world. Oppenheimer himself had bet $10 against George Kostiakowski's entire month's pay that the bomb would not work at all. Meanwhile, Edward Teller was making everyone nervous by applying liberal amounts of sunscreen in the pre-dawn darkness and offering to pass it around. On November 16, 1952, a B-36H bomber dropped a nuclear bomb over a point north of Runit Island in the Inuitak Atoll, resulting in a 500-kiloton explosion as part of a test code named Ivy. At 3:30, Groves and Oppenheimer pushed the time back to 5:30 at 4 o'clock. The rain stopped. Kostiakowski and his team armed the device shortly after 5 o'clock and retreated to S-10,000. Operation Greenhouse took place in the spring of 1951, consisting of 4 explosions at the Pacific Proving Grounds in the Pacific Ocean. This photo is from the third test, George, on May 9, 1951, the first thermonuclear bomb test, yielding 225 kilotons. In accordance with his policy that each observe from different locations in case of an accident, Groves left Oppenheimer and joined Bush and Conant at base camp. Those in shelters heard the countdown over the public address system, while observers at base camp picked it up on an FM radio signal during the final seconds. Most observers laid down on the ground with their feet facing the Trinity side and simply waited. Rope tricks are seen in this image of a nuclear explosion, taken less than 1 millisecond after detonation. During Operation Tumbler Snapper in 1952, this nuclear test device was suspended 300 feet above the Nevada desert floor and anchored by mooring cables. As the ball of plasma expanded, the radiating energy superheated and vaporized the cables just ahead of the fireball, resulting in the spike effects. As the countdown approached 1 minute, Isidore Robbie said to the man lying next to him, "Kenneth Greason, aren't you nervous?" "Nope," was Greason's reply. As Groves later wrote, "As I lay there in the final seconds, I thought only of what I would do if the countdown got to 0 and nothing happened." Conant said he never knew seconds could be so long. Mannequins that represent a typical American family will soon experience the fury of an atomic blast with the power of 40,000 tons of TNT at Yucca Flat, Nevada, on April 24, 1955. The test is being conducted to determine the survival chances of an atomic attack. Visible through the window is the tower 4,700 feet away on which the detonation will occur. As the countdown reached 10 seconds, Greason suddenly blurted out to his neighbor Robbie, "Now I'm scared." 3, 2, 1, and Sam Allison cried out, "Now!" at precisely 5:30 a.m. One of two. In Operation Doorstep, Conducted during the larger Operation Upshot Knothole nuclear bomb test, mannequins are seated at a table in the dining room of house number 2, attending a dinner party thrown by civil defense officials who are testing the effects of an atomic explosion on houses and occupants on March 15, 1953. On Monday, July 16, 1945, the nuclear age began. While Manhattan Project staff members watched anxiously, the device exploded over the New Mexico desert, vaporizing the tower and turning the asphalt around the base of the tower to green sand. Seconds after the explosion came a huge blast wave and heat searing out across the desert. 2 of 2. After the blast, mannequins lie strewn about the room, their dinner party interrupted violently by an atomic blast on March 17, 1953. No one could see the radiation generated by the explosion, but they all knew it was there. The steel container jumbo, weighing over 200 tons and transported to the desert, only to be eliminated from the test, was knocked ajar, even though it stood half a mile from ground zero as the orange and yellow fireball stretched up and spread. A second column, narrower than the first, rose and flattened into a mushroom shape, thus providing the atomic age with a visual image that has become imprinted on the human consciousness as a symbol of power and awesome destruction. 1 of 2. Stretched on a bed, in an upstairs bedroom of house number 2, is a mannequin ready to test the effects of an atomic explosion at the Atomic Proving Grounds near Las Vegas, Nevada, March 15, 1953. Through the window a mile and a half away stands a 300-foot steel tower atop which the bomb will be detonated. The purpose of the test blast is to show civil defense officials what would happen in an American city if it were subjected to an atomic attack. The most common immediate reactions to the explosion were surprise, joy, and relief. Lawrence was stepping from his car when, in his words, everything went from darkness to brilliant sunshine in an instant. He was momentarily stunned by the surprise. A military man was heard to exclaim, "The long hairs have let it get away from them." Hans Beeth, who had been looking directly at the explosion, was completely blinded for almost half a minute. 2 of 2. After the blast, a damaged bedroom, window and blankets missing, resulting from a test during an atomic blast on March 17, 1953. Norris Bradbury reported that the atom bomb did not fit into any preconceptions possessed by anybody. The blast wave knocked Kostiakowski, who was over 5 miles away, to the ground. He quickly scrambled to his feet and slapped Oppenheimer on the back, saying, "Oppie, you owe me $10. 1 of 2. Mannequins representing a typical American family gathered in a living room are pictured on March 15, 1953 in house number 2, awaiting an atomic test explosion on the Nevada Proving Grounds. The physicist Victor Weisskopf reported that our first feeling was one of elation. The word Isidore Robbie used was jubilant. Within minutes, Robbie was passing around a bottle of whiskey. 2 of 2. After the blast, a damaged living room, members of the mannequin family tossed about or missing after an atomic blast on March 17, 1953. At base camp, Bush, Conant, and Groves shook hands when they met. Groves said to Oppenheimer, "I am proud of you." Groves' assistant, Thomas Farrell, remarked to his boss that the war is over, to which Groves replied, "Yes, after we dropped 2 bombs on Japan." During the Plumbob test at the Nevada test site on August 30, 1957, the Franklin prime shot is detonated from a balloon in Yucca Flat at an altitude of 750 feet. Probably the most mundane response of all was Fermi's. He had calculated ahead of time how far the blast wave might displace small pieces of paper released into it about 40 seconds after the explosion, Fermi stood, sprinkled his pre-prepared slips of paper into the atomic wind, and estimated from their deflection that the test had released energy equivalent to 10,000 tons of TNT. The actual result, as it was finally calculated, 21,000 tons, 21 kilotons, was more than twice what Fermi had estimated with this experiment, and 4 times as much as had been predicted by most at Los Alamos. The test explosion of a hydrogen bomb during Operation Red Wing over the Bikini Atoll on May 20, 1956. Soon shock and euphoria gave way to more sober reflections. Robbie reported that after the initial euphoria, a chill soon set in on those present. The test director, Kenneth Bainbridge, called the explosion a foul and awesome display and remarked to Oppenheimer, "Now we are all sons of bitches." Ionization glow surrounds the cooling fireball of the Diablo shot, fired in Yucca Flat at 4:30 a.m. on Monday, July 15, 1957. Expressions of horror and remorse are especially common in the later writings of those who were present. Oppenheimer wrote that the experience called to his mind the legend of Prometheus, punished by Zeus for giving man fire, and said also that he thought fleetingly of Alfred Nobel's vain hope that dynamite would end wars. Most famously, Oppenheimer later recalled that the explosion had reminded him of a line from the Hindu holy text, the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The fireball of the Priscilla shot, fired on June 24, 1957, as a part of the Operation Plumbob series. Department of Defense text from F.G. Gosling, The Manhattan Project, Making the Atomic Bomb. NATO observers watched the detonation of Operation Plumbob Boltzmann on May 28, 1957.